The solicitor's office smelled of old paper and something vaguely medicinal, like forgotten tinctures. Dust motes danced in the sliver of afternoon sun that managed to pierce the grime-streaked window. I sat across from him, a man whose suit seemed too tight, his jowls quivering with the effort of polite pronouncements. My hands, usually steady on a brush, felt clammy. I rubbed them against my trousers, the coarse wool a small comfort. "And so, Mr. Dean," he'd said, his voice a dry rustle, "the estate of my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, now passes to I. Blackwood Manor." The name itself was a knot in my stomach. I hadn't seen her or the house in 20 years, not since. The memory was a shard of ice lodged beneath my ribs, sharp and cold. I'd pushed it down, buried it under layers of canvases and late nights, the hum of the city a constant anesthetic. But now the solicitor's words had unearthed it, a skeletal hand reaching from the earth. He slid a heavy, ornate key across the polished mahogany. It was cold, impossibly so, even in the stuffy room. The metal felt ancient, etched with a crest I didn't recognize. It pulsed with a faint, almost imperceptible vibration against my fingertips. "There are certain personal effects," the solicitor continued, his gaze flickering to a thick, leather-bound ledger on his desk. "Items of significant sentimental value. And, of course, the contents of the house. As per my grandmother's will, everything is yours." I nodded, my throat tight. Sentimental value, he had no idea. The house was a mausoleum of my childhood, a place I'd sworn I'd never return to, but the will was clear. There was no one else. My parents were long gone. Eleanor, my grandmother, had been a distant, spectral figure even when I'd lived under her roof. Her letters, when they came, were brief, infrequent, filled with pronouncements about the weather and the garden. She'd never mentioned me after I left, until now. I pocketed the key, the weight of it a tangible burden. The solicitor droned on about probate and taxes, but his words were a distant hum like bees trapped behind glass. My mind was already at Blackwood. I could almost smell the damp earth, the decaying grandeur, the faint, cloying scent of lavender that always clung to my grandmother's rooms. And beneath it all, something else, something I'd tried to forget. Driving out of the city was like shedding a skin. The concrete and glass gave way to rolling hills, then dense, encroaching woods. The sky, which had been a pale, washed-out blue, deepened to a bruised twilight. The air grew heavy, carrying the scent of pine and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like blood. It was larger than I remembered, more imposing. Windows, like vacant eyes, stared out from beneath heavy, gabled brows. A single skeletal tree clawed at the nearest wall, its branches like arthritic fingers. The gate groaned open with a sound like a dying breath. As I drove closer, I could see the neglect. Ivy choked the stone, its tendrils creeping into the window frames. The garden, once meticulously kept, was a riot of weeds and overgrown brambles, full of waiting. The house seemed to exhale a sigh of ancient dust. My boots crunched on the gravel path, the sound unnervingly loud. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the cold metal. This was it, the threshold, the point of no return, and so was she. I raised the key. The lock, a massive, ornate mechanism, was stiff, resisting my efforts. I pushed harder, the tumblers groaning in protest. Finally, with a sharp, metallic click, it yielded. The air inside was thick, stagnant, carrying the ghost of wood smoke and something else. Something sweet and sickly, like decaying flowers. My eyes adjusted slowly. A grand staircase draped in cobwebs curved upwards into the gloom. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors, their eyes seeming to follow me, lined the walls. A faint scratching sound, rhythmic and insistent, drew my attention. It was coming from somewhere deeper within the house. A soft, dry sound like fingernails on wood. My breath hitched. It was a sound I knew. A sound I'd spent my life trying to drown out. Where was it coming from? The gravel crunched under the tires. A sound like brittle bones snapping. Blackwood Manor loomed, a hulking silhouette against a bruised twilight sky. It wasn't just old, it was worn, as if the very air had leached the life from its stone bones. Ivy, thick as my forearm, clawed at the windows, obscuring the glass like cataracts. The air, even through the rolled-down window, was heavy, carrying the scent of damp earth and something else. Something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was profound, a physical pressure against my eardrums. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of the countryside. It was the silence of things holding their breath. I'd rehearsed this arrival 1,000 times in my head, each time more dramatic, more triumphant. This was just arrival, plain, unvarnished, and deeply unpleasant. Dust motes danced in the faint shafts of light that pierced the gloom like tiny, frantic spirits. The smell intensified here, a cloying perfume that made my stomach churn. It was the smell of decay, yes, but overlaid with that unsettling sweetness. Portraits lined the walls, their painted eyes seeming to follow me. Eleanor. Stern, unsmiling Eleanor, her gaze as sharp and judgmental as I remembered. And beside her, a younger woman, her face a pale, indistinct blur. Who was she? I didn't recognize her. I moved deeper into the house, my boots kicking up clouds of ancient dust. The drawing room. Faded velvet drapes hung in heavy folds, muffling the already weak light. A grand piano sat in the corner, its keys yellowed like old teeth, a single sheet of music still perched on the stand. It was yellowed too, brittle with age. I resisted the urge to touch it. It seeped into my bones, raising gooseflesh on my arms. The dining room. A long mahogany table still bore the imprint of a long-forgotten meal. A single, tarnished silver candlestick stood at its center, as if waiting for a flame that would never come. I ran a finger along the polished wood, the surface strangely smooth, almost unnervingly so, despite the layers of dust elsewhere. It felt cared for, but by whom? Eleanor had been a recluse for years. My gaze drifted to a small, locked cabinet against the far wall. Something about it drew me, a morbid curiosity I couldn't explain. I tried the handle. Locked, of course. What secrets did Eleanor keep tucked away in this mausoleum? My childhood memories of this place were a hazy, fractured mosaic, dominated by one recurring image. A porcelain doll, its eyes too wide, its painted smile too fixed. Leela. The thought of her sent a tremor through me. I hadn't seen her in 20 years, not since that summer. I moved on, my senses on high alert. I found myself holding my breath, listening. Listening for what? I didn't know. But the silence was beginning to feel less empty, more occupied. The library, floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with leather-bound volumes. The air here was thick with the scent of old paper and dried ink. I ran my hand along the spines, the titles blurring into an indecipherable mass. Then my fingers brushed against something soft, something that didn't belong. I pulled it out. A child's drawing. Crude, vibrant crayon lines on cheap paper. It depicted a stick figure, a house, and a sun. And in the corner, a small, doll-like figure with bright blue eyes and a red dress. My blood felt like ice water. It was my drawing. I remembered drawing it, the thrill of forbidden creation. But there was something wrong. The doll in the drawing. It was smiling, a wide, happy smile. The Leela I remembered. Her smile had always been a little off. A little too sharp, and the colors. The red of her dress seemed too intense, almost pulsing. The blue of her eyes seemed to bore into me, even on the page. I dropped the drawing as if it had burned me. It fluttered to the floor, landing face up. The painted eyes of the doll in the drawing seemed to follow me. I backed away, my heart beginning to thud a heavy, uneven rhythm against my ribs. I needed to get out of this room. I needed to find a place that felt less charged. I remembered a small, unused infirmary at the back of the house, a place Eleanor had kept locked for years. Perhaps it would be sterile, empty. I found the door, a plain, unadorned thing at the end of a long, dim corridor. The lock was old but surprisingly easy to pick. I pushed the door open, bracing myself. The room was small, sparsely furnished. A single cot, its mattress stained and worn. A metal cabinet, its drawers slightly ajar, and in the far corner, sitting perfectly still on a small wooden chair, was a figure. It was a person, dressed in a faded, shapeless garment. Their back was to me. They hadn't moved, not a twitch, not a sound. Why were they here? And why did they never leave this infirmary at night? The key grated in the lock, a shriek of metal on metal that echoed through the cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the grime-caked windows, each one a tiny ghost of a breath long exhaled. The air was thick, cloying, smelling of decay and something else. Something sweet and sickly, like overripe fruit left to fester. My grandmother. She'd always kept her house meticulously clean, or so I remembered. This was neglect on a scale I couldn't comprehend. I moved deeper into the house, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare Persian rugs. Each room was a mausoleum of forgotten lives. Taxidermied animals with glassy eyes stared from dusty shelves, their fur matted and dull. Overstuffed furniture sagged, its once vibrant patterns faded to a muted, mournful gray. A grand piano stood in the parlor, its keys yellowed and chipped, a silent testament to melodies long silenced. I ran a finger over the cool ivory, a faint tremor in my hand. The silence here wasn't empty. It was heavy, pregnant with unspoken things. My grandmother had been a collector. Of what, I'd never truly known. She'd always been a distant figure, a whisper in my parents' hushed conversations, a name attached to stern, unsmiling photographs. Inheriting this place felt less like a gift and more like a burden, a responsibility I'd never asked for. I found myself drawn to the study, a room at the back of the house, overlooking a neglected rose garden choked with weeds. A massive oak desk dominated the space, littered with papers, old letters tied with brittle ribbon, and an assortment of curios. It was here, amidst the detritus of her life, that I felt the prickle of unease intensify. The sickly sweet scent was stronger here, almost overpowering. I began sifting through the drawers, my movements slow, deliberate. Old photographs, faded and curled at the edges. Letters penned in her elegant, spidery script, detailing mundane household matters or local gossip. Then in the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of embroidered handkerchiefs, my fingers brushed against something hard, smooth, and disturbingly familiar. No lock, no clasp. Just a simple, fitted lid. My heart began to thud. A dull, insistent beat against my ribs. It wasn't a violent thud, but a slow, heavy one like a hammer striking damp earth. I hesitated, my breath catching in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to leave it, to slam the drawer shut and pretend I'd never seen it. But the artist in me, the part that craved understanding, the part that felt a desperate need to excavate the buried truths of my own past, compelled me forward. With trembling fingers, I lifted the lid. The scent of stale perfume and dust hit me with the force of a physical blow. And there, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was Layla. He was smaller than I remembered, her porcelain face unnervingly smooth, her painted eyes wide and unblinking, staring out from beneath a shock of impossibly black hair. Her dress, once a vibrant blue, was now a faded, moth-eaten rag. But it was the same dress. The same vacant stare, the same unnerving stillness. It wasn't just fear, it was recognition. Fragments of memory, sharp and jagged, began to surface. A dimly lit room, the creak of a rocking chair. You're mine now. My hands shook violently. I wanted to recoil, to smash the box, to throw the doll out the window and watch it shatter against the overgrown garden. But I couldn't move. My gaze was locked on Leela's painted eyes, and I felt a sickening certainty that he was looking back, not with the vacant stare of a toy, but with a knowing, malevolent intelligence. The air in the study grew heavy, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. The sickly sweet smell intensified, filling my lungs, making me gag. Was this what my grandmother had kept hidden, this thing? Why? The question swirled in my head, a frantic, desperate tide. The memory of her stern face, the unsmiling photographs, took on a new, terrifying dimension. Was she keeping it safe? Or was she keeping it for something? The ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall, previously a comforting rhythm, now sounded like a countdown. Each tick was a step closer to what? I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to banish the image of Leela's unblinking gaze, but it was seared behind my eyelids. I could still feel the coolness of the porcelain, the unnatural smoothness of her cheek. When I opened my eyes, the doll hadn't moved. It couldn't. It was just a doll. Yet, a faint smile seemed to play on its painted lips. Or was that just the trick of the dim light filtering through the dusty panes? Waiting. What had my grandmother been involved in? The air in the infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves, was thick and stagnant, like breath held too long. It pressed against my skin, a clammy shroud that smelled faintly of dust and something else. Something metallic and sweet, like overripe fruit left too long in the sun. I'd stumbled in here, drawn by a sound, a whisper that seemed to coil around my name, a sound I'd convinced myself was just the house settling, the wind finding new cracks in the ancient timbers. But it wasn't the wind. My eyes, still fixed on Leela, struggled to adjust to the dim, flickering light. The single bulb overhead, caged in wire mesh, cast long, dancing shadows that writhed like something alive. It was a ward, I supposed, or what was left of one. A narrow cot sat in the center of the room, its faded mattress stained with patterns I didn't want to decipher. No one occupied it. Not that I expected anyone to. This place felt like a repository for forgotten things, for memories that had outlived their usefulness. Leela, perched on the edge of the box, her porcelain skin eerily smooth under the weak light, seemed to pulse with a faint internal glow. Her smile, that chipped, painted smile, widened, or did it? My vision swam for a moment, the edges of the room blurring, the wallpaper a faded floral pattern that had long since surrendered to damp and decay seeming to ripple. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing them open again. The smile was still there, fixed, but now I swore there was a glint in her glassy eyes. A knowing glint. A low hum began to fill the room, not from the bulb, but from somewhere deeper, more resonant. It vibrated in my teeth, in the soles of my worn boots. It was a sound that burrowed into the marrow of my bones, a sound that felt ancient and hungry. I backed away, my heel catching on something unseen on the floor. The rough plaster scraped my palms, leaving a stinging sensation. "Get out," I rasped, the words dry and brittle in my throat. "Get out of my head." But she didn't move. She simply watched me, her head tilted at that unnerving angle as if listening to a conversation I couldn't hear. The hum intensified, a low thrumming that seemed to resonate with the frantic beat of my own heart, though mine was a frantic, modern rhythm utterly alien to this place. Then a different sound, a soft, rhythmic scraping, scrape, scrape, scrape. It was coming from inside the box. I froze, my breath catching in my chest. The lid, which I'd left slightly ajar, was slowly, deliberately closing. There was no wind, no tremor of the house. It moved with a quiet, inexorable force, as if an unseen hand were guiding it shut. My gaze darted to the cot. The stained mattress seemed to shift, a subtle undulation that made my stomach clench. Was it my eyes playing tricks? It had to be. I was an artist, but this felt different. This felt deliberate. The hum, however, did not cease. It deepened, coalescing into a low murmur of voices, indistinct yet undeniably present. My hands were clammy, my fingers tingling. I wanted to run, to flee this suffocating room and never look back, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. I was trapped by the sounds, by the lingering image of Leela's knowing gaze, by the unsettling stillness of the empty cot. The metallic sweet scent in the air grew stronger, cloying now, almost suffocating. It was the smell of decay, of something long dead refusing to stay buried. My breath hitched. I looked down. They were growing louder, more insistent. They were no longer just murmurs. They were coalescing, forming words, words that echoed the deepest, most buried fears of my childhood. Words that spoke of abandonment. Words that spoke of being forgotten. It felt slick, almost greasy. It was my name. Dean. It was Leela's voice, but it wasn't coming from the box. It was coming from behind me, from the empty cot. Who or what was speaking from that desolate bed? The cot. Empty. Yet the sound, a whisper like dry leaves skittering across a floor, had undeniably emanated from it. My breath hitched. I spun around, my eyes wide and raw, scanning the desolate space of the infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves. The moonlight, thin and watery, bled through the barred window, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed like something alive. Nothing. Just the peeling paint, the faint, metallic tang of old disinfectant, and the unsettling stillness that had always clung to this room. I took a hesitant step forward, my worn boots scuffing against the linoleum. My fingers, stiff and numb, clenched into fists. It had to be the wind, a trick of acoustics. That was the logical explanation. But logic felt like a fragile thing here, easily shattered. My gaze fell on the canvas propped against the far wall, a skeletal frame draped in a stained sheet. I hadn't touched it in days. The very thought of it made my stomach clench. My art. It used to be my escape, my sanctuary. Now, it felt like a cage, trapping the ugliness that was bleeding into me. I walked towards it, my reflection a distorted, elongated figure in the dusty glass of a framed medical diagram on the wall. It wasn't Leela's voice, not exactly. It was a child's voice, thin and reedy, laced with a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. My hand trembled as I reached for the sheet. The fabric felt rough, almost abrasive, against my fingertips. I pulled it back, revealing the nascent stages of a portrait. A portrait of a doll, Leela, but not the Leela of my childhood memories, the one with the chipped porcelain smile and vacant button eyes. This Leela was different. Her painted lips were stretched into a rictus grin that promised unspeakable things. Her button eyes, rendered in thick, impasto strokes of black, seemed to bore into me, alive with a malevolent intelligence. I'd started it weeks ago, a subconscious compulsion I couldn't explain. And then something had shifted. My hand had moved on its own, the brushstrokes becoming frenetic, violent. The colors I'd chosen were not the gentle pastels I usually favored, but deep, bruised purples, muddy browns, and a searing arterial red that I'd smeared on with my bare hands. A gallery owner had visited last week, a sharp-eyed woman who'd always championed my work. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. "Dean," he'd said, him brow furrowed, this is powerful, disturbing, but powerful. She'd looked at me, her gaze sharp, as if seeing something I couldn't. "What are you going through?" I hadn't been able to answer her then, and I couldn't answer myself now. The doll on the canvas was no longer just a doll, and it was using my hands, my talent, to make itself known. I looked around the infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves. The stark, sterile emptiness of the room felt like a mirror to my own internal landscape. The chipped enamel basin on the counter, the single, narrow bed with its threadbare blanket, the faint, acrid smell that still lingered, it all spoke of neglect, of forgotten suffering. I remembered this room from when I was a child, small and terrified, brought here for something, a fever, a broken bone. The details were hazy, shrouded in the fog of my childhood trauma, but the feeling remained, a profound sense of helplessness, of being utterly alone, and the doll. He had been there too. I remembered her sitting on the windowsill, her glass eyes glinting in the dim light, watching me, always watching. My heart hammered against my ribs. He's still here, Dean. He never left. Who? Who was the child talking about, the doll or someone else? I stumbled back from the canvas, my hands flying to my temples. The paint on Leela's face seemed to shimmer, to shift. There was that a tear rolling down her porcelain cheek. No. It was just a trick of the light, a smudge of paint. It had to be. The air grew heavy, suffocating. It was Leela. He was here in my studio, in my mind, guiding my hand, twisting my art into a grotesque reflection of her own corrupted soul. I looked down at my hands, the hands that had created such beauty, such pain. They were no longer entirely my own. What had I become? And what was Leela turning me into? The air in the infirmary at night. One patient who never leaves hung thick and heavy, a cloying perfume of stale disinfectant, and something else. Something metallic, like old pennies. I stood in the doorway, my breath catching in my throat. The single bare bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows that danced with every tremor of the failing fluorescent tube. It was a room I hadn't dared to enter since childhood, a place my grandmother had always kept locked. A place whispered about in hushed, fearful tones by the few staff who dared speak of it at all. My grandmother's journals. I clutched the worn, leather-bound volumes to my chest, their pages brittle with age. They were hidden in a false bottom of her old vanity, a secret I'd stumbled upon while sifting through the detritus of her life. Each entry was a descent, a slow unraveling of a mind I thought I'd known. The infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves. It was a name I hadn't heard in years, a name that still sent a shiver of primal fear down my spine. It was where she kept it. Layla, my grandmother, it turned out, hadn't just collected antiques. She'd curated them, imbued them with intent. The journals detailed her growing obsession with the doll, a relic she claimed held a fragment of something ancient, something that craved attention. And my grandmother, in her loneliness, in her desperation to fill the vast emptiness of the mansion, had obliged. I traced the faded ink, my fingers brushing against dried splotches that could have been ink or something far more unsettling. The timeline matched. The descriptions of Leela's growing influence, her uncanny ability to manipulate events to sow discord. It was all there. She wrote about the child. My childhood. My grandmother's entries became more frantic, more desperate as she detailed my visits. She tried to shield me, she wrote, to keep Leela away. But Leela was cunning. Leela was hungry, and my grandmother, in her misguided belief that he could control it, had allowed Leela access. She believed Leela was merely a conduit, a way to channel the doll's power to appease its insatiable demands. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, pricking at my nostrils. I looked around the room. The walls were stained, peeling in long, ragged strips like sunburnt skin. A single, narrow bed stood in the center, its mattress stained and threadbare. Beside it, a small, overturned wooden chair lay on the floor. It was the same chair I remembered. My grandmother's script grew shaky here, almost illegible. She described a night, a particular night. The storm raging outside, the wind howling like a banshee. She'd brought Leela into the infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves, intending to lock her away to finally sever the connection. But the doll had resisted. It had fought back, not with physical force, but with a subtler, more insidious power. It had preyed on my grandmother's deepest fears, her regrets, her guilt. And I, a small child, had been caught in the crossfire. The journal spoke of a pact, a desperate bargain struck between my grandmother and the doll. To protect me, he had. What? What had she done? The ink blurred, smudged by what felt like my own trembling hands. She'd written of a sacrifice, a part of herself, a part of her connection to me, given over to Leela to keep me safe, to keep me from the doll's full attention. My vision swam. The room seemed to tilt. Was this the revelation? Was this the truth my grandmother had tried so desperately to bury, to forget? That she hadn't just owned a cursed doll, but that she'd actively participated in its malevolence, using me as a shield, a pawn in her own twisted game. I stumbled backward, the journals falling from my grasp, scattering across the grimy floor. My lungs burned. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I could feel it, a prickling sensation on my skin, the same feeling I'd had as a child, the overwhelming certainty that I was not alone. What was that metallic scent? And why did it smell so much like my own fear? The single bare bulb overhead cast long, distorted shadows that danced like skeletal fingers across the peeling linoleum floor. The patient, a gaunt figure swathed in a faded gray blanket, lay propped against a stack of yellowed medical journals. Their eyes, dark and unnervingly still, were fixed on me. I'd retreated here to this forgotten corner of the estate, seeking some semblance of order, some tangible evidence of the decay that had consumed my family. My grandmother's journals, filled with her increasingly frantic script, spoke of Leela not as a doll but as a presence, a parasitic entity that fed on fear and memory. The entries grew more fragmented, more desperate, until they dissolved into a series of nonsensical symbols and desperate pleas. I'd hoped to find answers, a rational explanation for the prickling unease that had settled over me since my arrival. Instead, I found this room and this patient. The patient shifted, their hand, thin as a bird's claw, emerging from the blanket to grip the edge of the cot. The movement was slow, deliberate, each joint protesting with a faint, brittle sound. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice rough. The patient's lips, cracked and dry, pulled back in what might have been a smile or perhaps a grimace. A keeper, they rasped. Of secrets. In that brief blackout, I could have sworn I heard it, a faint, tinkling laugh like broken glass. Leela. The metallic scent intensified, thick and cloying, making my stomach churn. It was no longer just the smell of old pennies, it was the scent of rust, of decay, of something wrong. She doesn't want I to leave. The patient continued, their voice gaining a strange, resonant quality. She never wanted anyone to leave. My hand instinctively went to the doorknob. I needed to get out, now, but the door wouldn't budge. I twisted the knob with all my might, rattling it, shoving against the heavy wood. It felt as if it were bolted from the outside, or perhaps from within. Panic, sharp and sudden, clawed at my throat. "It's no use," the patient murmured, their gaze unwavering. "She's already woven her web." I turned back to them, desperation lending my voice a frantic edge. "Who is she? What do I mean, woven her web?" The patient's eyes, wide and glassy, seemed to look past me, into some unseen distance. The threads are everywhere, in the dust, in my own memories. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I thought of the dolls lining the shelves in the nursery, their painted eyes following me. He was here, and she wasn't just watching, he was acting. My own memories. Leela's influence had always been tied to my childhood trauma, to the fear I'd buried so deep I'd almost forgotten it. I sank to my knees, my hands pressed against the unyielding wood of the door. The metallic scent was overwhelming now, thick and suffocating. I could feel a pressure building behind my eyes, a dull throbbing that mirrored the frantic beat of my heart. "What does she want?" I choked out, the words barely forming. The patient's head tilted, a slow, creaking motion. "She wants I to stay," they rasped. "Forever." A sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. The tinkling of a tiny bell. It seemed to be coming from the hallway just beyond the infirmary door. It was the same sound Leela's dress used to make. The door was still locked. The patient watched me, their expression unreadable. The bell tinkled again, closer this time. Was the bell real or another trick? The bell. It was so faint I almost convinced myself it was just the house settling, a trick of the wind whistling through broken panes. But the sound persisted, a delicate, maddening jingle. Leela. My breath hitched. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled with the doorknob of the infirmary. The air in here was thick, heavy with the scent of stale disinfectant and something else, something sickly sweet like decaying flowers. I'd avoided this room since I'd arrived, a gaping maw of forgotten suffering. Now it was the only direction the sound was leading me. My fingers finally closed around the cold brass. I twisted. The latch groaned, a protest from the ancient wood. Pushing the door inward, I peered into the gloom. Moonlight, thin and watery, bled through the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like skeletal figures. The room was sparse, utilitarian. A narrow cot stood against one wall, its mattress stained and ripped. A rusted metal cabinet loomed in a corner, and then I saw him, the patient. He lay on the cot, a still, shrouded form beneath a thin, gray blanket. He never left. I knew that much. A relic of the house, a permanent fixture. I'd never seen him before, not really. Not when I dared to peek inside during the day. But tonight, a primal fear coiled in my gut. He was awake. I could feel it, a prickling sensation on my skin. He hadn't moved, but his presence hummed with a quiet awareness. The tinkling bell. It was closer now, a siren song from the hallway just beyond the infirmary's open maw. I had to go. I stepped out of the infirmary, leaving the still figure on the cot bathed in moonlight. I reached the end of the hallway, the nursery. The bell tinkled again, a playful, sinister chime. I could feel her presence, a palpable weight in the air pressing down on me. He was waiting. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. I turned it. The lock, surprisingly, clicked open. It had never opened for me before. This was different. This was an invitation. I pushed the door open. Even in the dim light, it was a riot of faded pastels and forgotten joy. A rocking horse stood frozen mid-gallop, its painted eyes staring blankly. A collection of wooden blocks lay scattered across the floor, forming an incomplete, nonsensical pattern. And in the center of the room, bathed in a shaft of moonlight that cut through the dust motes, sat Leela. He was exactly as I remembered her, yet so much more. Her porcelain skin was cracked, her painted smile a grotesque rictus. Her button eyes, once innocent, now gleamed with a malevolent intelligence. Her tiny silk dress, the one that had always jingled with those damned bells, was faded and torn, but the bells still hung, silent now, around her neck. He was larger somehow. She didn't move, she just watched me. A guttural sound escaped my throat, a strangled sob. This was it, the source. The thing that had haunted my nightmares for decades. It was real, and it was here. My mind, a battlefield of fragmented memories and raw fear, struggled to process the sight. Then, a new sound, always you. My gaze snapped back to Leela. Her head tilted, a slow, deliberate movement. A smile, a true smile, spread across her painted lips. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated evil. It was her. Her influence, her power, radiating from the doll. I stumbled back, my heel catching on a stray block. I fell, my hands scraping against the rough, splintered wood of the floor. The pain was a welcome distraction, a grounding sensation in the swirling chaos. I looked up at Leela. Had she always been a part of me? But then something shifted, a flicker of defiance. A memory of my own strength, the strength I'd forged in the fires of my art, in the quiet, deliberate act of creation. This doll, this thing, it fed on fear. It thrived on my weakness. I pushed myself up, my body aching, my mind reeling. I wouldn't let her win, not this time. I met her gaze, those vacant button eyes that now seemed to bore into my very soul. Get out of my head, I rasped, my voice raw and trembling. You don't belong here. Leela's head tilted further. The bells around her neck gave a faint, mocking tinkle. The pressure in my chest intensified, making it hard to breathe. I could feel her trying to break me, to shatter the fragile remnants of my sanity, but I held on. I focused on the feel of the rough wood beneath my fingers, the scent of dust and decay, the faint moonlight on my skin. This is my house, I declared, my voice gaining a fraction of its former strength. And you are just a doll. Did her painted smile falter for a fraction of a second? Or was it just another trick of the light, another figment of my terrified imagination? The doll remained still, an embodiment of pure malice, its gaze fixed on me. What was she planning next? The painted smile. It was still there, fixed and unwavering. My eyes, raw and burning, strained to find any tremor, any crack in its porcelain composure. But there was nothing. Just the glassy stare, reflecting the dim emergency lighting of the infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves. The air, thick with the sterile tang of disinfectant and something else, something cloying and sweet like decaying flowers, pressed in on me. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged sound in the vast, echoing silence. I remembered the nursery. The dust motes dancing in the slivers of moonlight, the rocking horse frozen mid-rock, and Leela. Always Leela, perched on the antique crib, her button eyes seeming to follow my every move. But this was different. This was the infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves. The cold linoleum beneath my bare feet was slick with a dampness I couldn't quite place. It wasn't water, it felt viscous. My hands trembled as I reached out, not for the doll, but for the worn wooden stool beside the cot. The cot was empty, the sheets neatly tucked, as if no one had ever occupied it, but I knew. I felt it. The presence was here, woven into the very fabric of this place as it had been in the house, in my childhood room, in the deepest corners of my mind. A truth that had slithered out from beneath the layers of denial and fear, unearthed in the dusty attic of the mansion, among brittle photographs and forgotten letters. My grandmother hadn't been merely eccentric. He had been a keeper, a guardian, and Leela was no mere toy. He was a conduit, a vessel for something ancient, something that fed on innocence, on fear, on memory. My grandmother had tried to contain it, to lock it away, but the house, her failing health, had weakened the wards. And I, with my inherited sensitivity, my artist's mind, had become the perfect target. A soft, rhythmic creaking began, slow, deliberate. My head snapped up. The rocking chair in the corner, draped with a faded quilt, was swaying back and forth. No one was there. My muscles coiled, ready to spring, but my feet felt glued to the floor. The sweet, decaying scent intensified, coating the back of my throat. This was it. The final confrontation. Not a battle of fists or weapons, but a war waged in the silent theater of the mind. Leela's painted smile seemed to widen, a cruel, knowing curve. I could feel her probing, sifting through my memories, searching for the deepest wounds, the tenderest fears. The day the world fractured, the feeling of being watched, always watched. My knuckles were white where I gripped the stool. I forced my gaze away from the rocking chair, away from the doll, and focused on a single chipped tile on the floor. Breathe, Dean, just breathe. The air tasted metallic now, like old pennies. Then a sound. A faint, childish giggle. It was the sound I remembered from my nightmares, the sound that had haunted my waking hours for decades. But it wasn't Leela's giggle. It was mine, or what mine used to be. The rocking chair stilled. The creaking stopped. I blinked, my vision swimming. The doll was still on the shelf, its painted smile mocking me. It was gone, vanished as if it had never been. I stumbled forward, my legs weak and unsteady. I had to make sure. I had to be certain. My hand, still shaking, reached out, and with a surge of desperate strength, I snatched Leela from the shelf. Her porcelain skin was cool, unnervingly smooth. I held her up, turning her in the dim light, searching for any sign of the entity, any flicker of the malevolence that had held me captive for so long. Nothing. He was just a doll, a very old, very creepy doll. But as I looked at her, I saw something else. A faint, almost imperceptible smudge on her cheek, like dried tear tracks. It was a flaw, an imperfection. And in that imperfection, I saw not a gateway for evil, but a sign of its struggle, its eventual defeat, or was it? I dropped the doll. It landed with a soft thud on the linoleum, its painted smile still fixed. I backed away slowly, my eyes never leaving it. Had I truly won? Or had I merely been released, only to carry the echo of her influence within me, a scar that would never truly fade? The infirmary at night, one patient who never leaves, held its secrets close. And I, Dean, was now one of them.